My brother can't talk, so I came instead. Say it once and the room goes quiet like someone flipped. Off the city noise for a minute. You heard shoes squeak on the gym floor, chairs scrape, the faint rattle of a radiator, and then the whole room smells like cafeteria pizza and bleach and paperwork. Mikey stands in the doorway holding a folder that's nearly as big as his chest. Crayon drawings poking out the top like flags. He's 8, hoodie too big? Sneakers scuffed. But his jaw is set like he's been carrying this line around in his pocket all morning waiting for the right second to drop it. Adults were in suits and polos and that half-bored school lunch glow on their faces. They were ready for the usual test scores, behavioral charts. Talk about placement, like it ain't people's lives, but they weren't ready for a kid to walk into the middle of their meeting and tell the truth in a way. Nobody in that room had the spine to say. The principal coughs, the district rep flips a page. Ms. Vega, Noah's teacher, gives this little sound like she's trying not to, cry and like she's proud all at once. Mikey walks up to the table like he owns the place, drops the folder down, and sets it in front of the chair where a stack of reports already lives, then leans on it like it's his shield. My brother, he says, and points across the room where Noah sits with his little hands busy drawing. Noah who doesn't speak, who talks with pictures and looks that cut right through junk grown-up words. He can't talk no more, so I came instead. Simple, clean, brutal. The room shifts. A couple of parents snort under their breath. A lawyer straightens his tie. And over by the corner table, someone's phone buzzes with a low tweet that'll matter later, but not right now. You can feel the weight of what's at stake? Not just placement or a box on a form, but a kid's whole world, being narrowed down by paperwork, written by folks who never had to sleep, through the beeping of a single hospital monitor or count change on a dresser to pay a copay. That is the hook. A small body, a giant folder, and a truth that doesn't fit into the district's neat little boxes. You're listening because you know how fast a room full of adults can close ranks. But something else is in the air tonight. A woman in the back with a sleek coat and a watch that costs more than a month's rent is watching. And her eyes don't look bored. They look interested, like someone who maybe once got ignored and now can't help but notice when another person is about to be. All right, so rewind 5 minutes and you'd see the same kid outside the multi-purpose room, huffing from the walk, cheeks red, fingers sticky with melted orange juice from the corner store because he grabbed a cheap juice and didn't want to waste time. He told his mom, whose name is Tanya and who works the midnight cleaning, shift on 3rd so the rent stays paid and the lights. Don't blink, I'll go. Mom, you rest. She didn't protest too loud because she's tired the way only parents who never catch a full night are tired. She pressed a quarter into his fist, kissed his forehead, and watched him go like a lifeline throwing. A stone into a dark pond where ripples are the only sign something landed. Back in the gym-turned-hearing room, the grown-ups had already lined up their speeches. Psychologist with the binder full of assessments, the district rep talking about resources and safety, the lawyer saying things that sound like they were printed on a death certificate for dreams. Mikey doesn't come in with a speech. He comes with paper, crayon. People in stickhouse drawings with arrows and hearts, and a picture of Noah with a balloon bigger than his head. And he explains, plain as day, how Noah tells him things by drawing, how Noah hums when he's happy and presses his forehead against the window when he's scared, how Noah once pointed to a picture of a dog and then said the word with his eyes so strong. It felt like he'd shouted it. He doesn't beg. He doesn't plead. He just says it like a fact. Like the kind of fact that can't be argued with if you got a heart at all. Do not take my brother away. He needs people who listen, not people who put him in a place so far away he can't see me. And in that breath between his last sentence and the adults clearing their throats, a new voice cuts in. Not the legal one or the tired counselor one, but a quiet, deliberate voice that belongs to someone who's used to being listened to and who chooses, right then, to listen. Evelyn Park, who funds programs and has her name on glossy plaques, shifts forward and asks to see the drawing. She crouches like a grown-up trying to meet a kid's height and looks at the pictures like she's reading a map. And you get the sense she's not doing it for the cameras or the donors. She's doing it because something in that drawing speaks to a missing part of her life. The meeting was supposed to be a checklist. It turned into a crossroad. That's how part one ends, with a kid saying one line that makes a room full of adults suddenly feel the weird, heavy responsibility of doing the right thing, and with a woman who could have walked away deciding she won't. You hang up this beat, with the taste of cheap coffee and the sound of crayons scraping paper, waiting to see which way the grown-ups will bend, toward policies and boxes, or toward a messier, braver kind of mercy. The second the school hearing dragged past the 15-minute mark, you could practically feel the room tilting off its usual axis, like everyone realized this. Wasn't going to be one of those stiff, let's check the boxes and move on. Meetings anymore? Nah, this thing had a pulse now. And most of that heartbeat came from an 8-year-old kid sitting with his knees swinging off a chair. Too big for him. Mikey wasn't fidgeting like a normal kid. He wasn't even scared. He had that tight little line between his eyebrows like he'd already decided. He was gonna stand his ground even if nobody else did. And honestly, that vibe hit harder than any speech a grown-up in that room had planned. Across the table, the district rep, you know the type. Tie knotted too tight. Hair gelled like he's trying to hold on to control. With every strand, flipped through his folders like he was hoping that paperwork would magically erase the fact that a literal child had just out-argued the system. But behind him, there was Evelyn Park, the woman in the sleek coat, leaning forward with her chin resting gently on her hand, studying. Mikey like he wasn't a disruption, like he was the only person saying anything real. And she asked him, real calm, "Sweetheart, can you tell me what scares Noah?" And damn, the whole room froze like someone stuck them inside a snow globe. Mikey blinked, lifted one of Noah's drawings, and pointed to the scribbled blue circles that meant noise and the jagged red lines that meant too many people. And he said, "He gets scared when grown-ups talk fast and don't let him finish with the pictures." No lawyer in a $1,000 suit could counter that. You could practically see guilt dripping off the table. But the principal tried anyway, clearing his throat like a rusty engine, saying words like protocol and policy, and Evelyn cut him off with nothing but a single eyebrow raise, the kind rich people learn after years of shutting down boardrooms. Without raising their voice once, she turned back to Mikey with this softness you don't expect from folks in designer watches, asking if Noah liked his current classroom. Mikey hesitated, and then he said something so raw the air changed around him. He likes the kids. He doesn't like when the teacher yells. You could have heard a pin drop. Seriously, even the AC stopped humming like it wanted to hear the rest. In the corner, the school counselor bit her lip, eyes wide, because she knew that wasn't something the reports captured. Evelyn didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. She just looked at Noah, who was humming quietly over his coloring pages, tapping the side of his shoe against the chair leg in a rhythm Mikey recognized. That's when she reached for her phone, typed something quick, then looked straight at the district rep. "I'm staying for the rest of this hearing," she said, voice cool as February pavement. "And I want every file involving this child brought to this room." The rep blinked, startled, confused, alarmed, and then he saw the name on her badge. And the man went pale like someone had sucked the color right out of him. See, Evelyn wasn't just some board member. She was the board member. The biggest donor the district had. The woman whose signature sat on half the plaques in the hallway. Suddenly, every protocol in the world didn't matter. That's when you realized the playing field wasn't just shifting, it was leveling. By the time the files arrived, 3 overstuffed, binders that looked like they weighed more than Mikey, the vibe in the room wasn't official meeting anymore. It felt more like a trial, where everyone realized they might be on the wrong side of the truth. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves, literally, and opened the first folder, flipping page after page with this surgical precision that made grown men sweat. Every time she found something off, a missing signature, an incomplete evaluation, a teacher note written like someone half-caring at 2 a.m., she made this tiny sound that told the whole room she was filing the information away for later. Mikey leaned forward every time she paused, like he was scared she might miss something important about Noah. And she didn't. She saw everything. Why does this note say he's unresponsive when this drawing. Clearly shows he communicated the entire event? She asked, holding up a page Noah had illustrated after a fire drill. The counselor spoke softly. Because the teacher didn't look at the picture, and somehow that quiet honesty cracked something open in the air. Mikey swallowed hard, his voice wobbling as he said, "He talks, just not with words." That was it. That was the moment. Evelyn set the folder down and gave the kind of look that makes every adult in a 10-foot radius feel like they need to rethink their entire life. She turned to the principal, folding her hands calmly on the table. "Explain why you're recommending a nonverbal child be sent to a facility 3 towns away when he has a sibling who advocates for him better than any adult in this building." The man stammered. Something about funding, shortages, and behavioral concerns, but none of it landed. Not with Evelyn. Not with the counselor. Not with the dozen staff. Members now peeking in from the hallway pretending they weren't eavesdropping. And definitely not with Mikey, who stood up so fast his chair squeaked. "He's not bad," he said, voice shaking but loud. "He's just scared. And you're not listening." That line, that raw, trembling, honest line, hit Evelyn like a punch she didn't see coming. She looked at this tiny kid, standing up for someone who couldn't stand up for himself, and something in her expression shifted from sympathy to full-blown resolve. "I'm calling an independent evaluator," she said, grabbing her phone again. "I'll pay for it personally. And until that evaluation is completed, this placement hearing is paused." The principal opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but she didn't even glance at him. She was already typing, already fixing what grown-ups had broken. The whole room fell into this stunned quiet where even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz softer. Mikey exhaled, shoulders dropping, like he'd been holding up the whole sky by himself. He looked at Noah across the room, and Noah's eyes met his with this small, soft recognition that said more than any sentence ever could. And then, right when you think the room can't get any more flipped upside down, the gym doors open again. A man in a charcoal suit walks in, talking quietly into a headset. And when he sees Evelyn, he stops, straightens, and nods with a level of respect that tells you exactly who he is, her son. Her CEO's son, the millionaire one the title warned you about. And the second he sees the scene, the folders, the kid, the tension, he steps toward the table with a face like someone about to rewrite the whole story. That's where part 2 ends, the moment before everything changes, the second when power walks into the room, not to control, but to listen. And you know something big is about to break wide open the second the man in the charcoal suit stepped fully into the room. It felt like someone hit a dimmer switch on the whole gym, not darker, just sharper, like every sound. Every whisper, every shuffle suddenly mattered. His presence wasn't loud, but it carried weight the way thunder does before it cracks. You feel it in your ribs before you hear it. He wasn't tall in a movie star way or flashy like a guy trying too hard. He had that steady, quiet confidence of someone who didn't need to prove he belonged in any room. And the second his eyes landed on Evelyn, his whole posture eased, like her being there meant he didn't have to armor up as tight. "Mom," he said under his breath, and already people in the room were straightening because Mom. That meant this wasn't just some CEO cameo. This was the son of the district's biggest donor, a man who could rewrite budgets with a signature. And he was walking straight toward the table like the hearing was now officially his. Business, too. But what struck everyone hardest wasn't the suit or the title. It was the way he kneeled right down at eye level with Mikey before speaking to a single adult. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, voice warm, not corporate. "I'm Daniel." And Mikey blinked at him, confused but not scared. Because Daniel didn't look at him like a problem or a prop. He looked at him the way people look when they see a kid carrying something way too heavy for his size. "My mom tells me you're here for your brother," Daniel said, glancing at the folder like it was sacred. Mikey nodded, gripping the edge of his hoodie sleeve. "He can't talk," he whispered. So I came instead." And Daniel's whole face changed. Not pity, not discomfort, something closer to grief mixed with admiration, the kind people get when they recognize Strength no one should have had to learn so young. He sat back on his heels, looked at the principal, the rep, the staff, and asked quietly but firmly, "Who decided this child didn't deserve to be heard?" Silence. Actual painful silence. Grown adults who usually filled the room with excuses couldn't make one single sound. Daniel stood slowly, palms on the table, scanning the files like he could see straight through the pages. Then he pulled out one of Noah's drawings, the blue swirls and the jagged red lines, and held it up. "This is communication," he said. "This is language. This is effort. This is a child telling you everything he can with what he has." He tapped the edge of the paper. "And y'all labeled it unresponsive?" The principal coughed. The rep opened his mouth. But Daniel didn't give them the chance to spit out another empty line. "We're changing the process," he said. "Right now." And something in his tone told you he wasn't bluffing. But before anyone could respond, Noah, quiet, gentle, humming Noah, walked up behind Mikey and held onto the back of his shirt. Not tugging, not panicking, just touching him like an anchor, like saying, "I'm here." And that tiny gesture broke something. Wide open in the room that rules, and reports never could, Daniel crouched down again, this time turning toward Noah with a softness you don't see in boardrooms or budget meetings, the kind of gentleness that never needs to be performed, because it just lives in a person's bones. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, not crowding him, just offering space. "Can I see what you drew?" Noah blinked, then held out his paper, a new one, still warm from the friction of crayons. It showed two stick kids holding hands under a big yellow sun. Daniel smiled at it. But then something shifted in his expression. Some flicker of recognition, like he'd seen that image once before in his own life. Maybe long ago when things were simpler and someone had drawn him safety on a page. He swallowed, then stood and faced the adults again. "I want a full audit of this case," he said, voice cutting clean through the stale air. Every missed note, every incomplete evaluation, every time someone wrote "won't speak," instead of asking why. The rep tried to argue policy. "Sir, we don't typically—" But Daniel shut it down, with a glance so sharp it could have sliced the man's clipboard in half. "We're not doing typical anymore," he said. "Typical got this family ignored." Mikey watched all of this with wide eyes, a mix of hope and disbelief swirling in his chest. He wasn't used to adults fighting for him and Noah. Most days it felt like the opposite. But right then, watching Daniel and Evelyn stand like a two-person army, he let himself breathe deeper than he had in weeks. Then, in a twist that made the whole back row gasp, Daniel stepped closer to the boys and lowered his voice, like he was letting them in on a secret. "When I was your age," he said, eyes flicking to Mikey, "I had a brother who needed someone to speak for him, too." And that line hit the room like a slow, heavy drumbeat, not loud, but unforgettable. "I know what it feels like to want to protect someone who can't always say what they need," he said. "And I also know how it feels when grown-ups don't listen." The counselor wiped her eyes. Ms. Vega pressed her hand over her mouth. Even the principal shifted in his seat, guilt creeping up his spine. Daniel straightened, then placed one hand lightly on Mikey's shoulder, grounding him. "You did the right thing coming here," he said. "And I'm not letting anyone push your brother out of this school." That's when Noah reached up, slow, careful, and slipped his small fingers into Daniel's. The room stopped breathing. Daniel looked down, stunned, and a single, quiet exhale left him like he wasn't prepared for the weight of trust in that touch. Evelyn smiled, that soft, knowing smile moms get when they see something forming they don't want to name too early. And then Daniel said the line that flipped the entire story on its head. "As of today, I'm funding a full inclusion program here. New staff, new training, new resources. And Noah Parker will be its first student." The rep dropped his pen. The principal blinked like the building was spinning. Mikey covered his mouth, eyes filling with tears he refused to let fall. And just like that, the meeting wasn't a place of fear anymore. It was a beginning, a crack of light where there'd only been closed doors. But the best part? Daniel wasn't done. He looked at the boys, steady, certain, and said, "This isn't charity. It's justice. That's where part 3 lands, in that breathless space where two brothers who walked in alone realize they're not alone anymore, and where the millionaire CEO finally shows what real power looks like when you use it right. By the time the hearing ended, the whole room felt flipped upside down. Not loud, not chaotic, but heavy in that way moments get when everyone knows something important just happened. Something they'll remember even if they pretend they won't. Mikey sat there trying to process it all, his fingers curled into the soft cotton of his hoodie, his heart pounding like someone had finally handed him the ending to a story. He'd been trying to write alone for years. Noah leaned against him, humming the little tune he always hummed when he felt safe. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a nervous habit, it sounded like relief. But just when Mikey thought Daniel was done fighting for them, he stood again, clearing his throat softly in the now-hushed gym. "One more thing," he said, turning back to the adults who looked like they'd been hit by a quiet hurricane. "You're going to rewrite Noah's evaluation using the new inclusion guidelines, and you're going to do it with a specialist who understands nonverbal communication." Nobody argued, not because they agreed, but because the tone in his voice left no room for anything else. Then Daniel crouched, back down beside the boys like all the noise and pressure above didn't exist. "I meant what I said," he told Mikey, softer now, as if this part was just between them. "You're not fighting this alone anymore." Mikey swallowed hard, warmth building behind his eyes. But before he could reply, Noah tugged Daniel's sleeve, holding up his drawing, the one with all three of them under the big yellow sun. Daniel looked at it for a long moment, his jaw flexing just slightly, like maybe this small paper meant more than any corporate award he'd ever gotten. Then he did something that made Ms. Vega gasp in the doorway. He pulled a pen from his suit pocket and gently wrote his name at the bottom corner of the drawing, like a promise sealed in ink. And the whole room just softened. Adults straightened. Kids whispered. Even the principal sat down slowly, realizing the story they'd tried to bury was now bigger than all of them. When the meeting finally adjourned, Evelyn wrapped her arms around Noah and Mikey, hugging them with the calm strength only moms have when they're relieved but don't want to cry in public. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Both of you." But as they all walked toward the door, Daniel paused, slipped his phone from his pocket, and said, "Do you three have a minute? There's somewhere I want to take you." His voice didn't sound like a CEO's command anymore. It sounded like an invitation, a beginning. And before Mikey could even ask why, Daniel added, "I think it's time you see what real support looks like." The door opened, sunlight flooding the hallway, like someone had turned the world back on again. Outside, instead of heading for his car, Daniel walked them down the sidewalk to a quiet brick building with big glass windows and a blue sign that shimmered in the afternoon light. "The Parker Learning Center," the sign read. Except Mikey froze because that name hadn't existed yesterday. Daniel caught his expression and smiled that small, almost shy smile he only used around them. "We finished it last night," he said, holding the door open. "Didn't want to say anything until I saw how today went." Inside, the space wasn't fancy or overwhelming, it was warm. Soft lights, sensory-friendly corners, tables filled with puzzles, picture boards, communication cards, books with bright covers and big textures. It felt like someone built a place where Noah's brain wouldn't have to shrink itself to fit in. "This is for him?" Mikey whispered, like he couldn't trust his own voice. "For both of you," Daniel corrected. "For any kid who communicates differently, for families who need someone to stand up before they collapse from carrying everything alone." Noah wandered toward a wall of colorful AAC devices, buttons, screens, things he'd never had access to. And when he pressed one, the gentle robotic voice said, "Hello." Noah froze, startled. Then he hit it again. "Hello." His smile grew. He hit another one. "I want break." Then another. "I feel happy." And something in Mikey broke. Open at the sight, all the years of guessing, hoping, trying to translate silence into meaning. And here was his brother speaking in ways he never could before. Not because he didn't want to, but because no adult had ever given him the tools. Tears slid down Mikey's face before he could stop them. Daniel stepped closer, quiet and steady. "This isn't charity," he said again. "It's what should have existed all along." Evelyn wiped her eyes. Noah kept pressing buttons, voice after voice after voice, like he'd been waiting years to be heard. Then, out of nowhere, he pressed a green heart-shaped switch. "Thank you," it said. Daniel swallowed hard. His voice cracked when he answered, "You're welcome, buddy." They stayed there for over an hour, exploring every corner until Noah's humming turned soft and sleepy. On the walk back outside, Daniel paused, sunlight catching in his hair, expression gentler than ever. "Listen," he said, looking at Mikey and Evelyn. "I didn't step in today because I'm a CEO. I stepped in because someone should have stepped in for me and my brother when we were kids, and nobody did." Mikey's breath hitched. Daniel continued, voice unsteady in the most human way. "I know what it feels like to scream, silently for someone to care. Then," he placed a hand on Mikey's shoulder, firm, steady. "But you didn't stay silent. You walked into that room fighting for someone you love. And that kind of courage, it changes people." He paused. "It changed me." Noah slipped his hand into Daniel's again. Evelyn smiled through tears, the kind that come from hope instead of fear. And right there, in the soft light of a late afternoon that felt too quiet to be real, Mikey realized something. They didn't just survive the hearing. They gained something bigger than victory. They gained someone who saw them, someone who showed up, someone who wasn't leaving when things got messy. A CEO didn't save them. A good man did. And as they walked away together, the sun warming their backs, the world felt a little wider, a little kinder. Like maybe, just maybe, this time the story was finally theirs to write.